Yeah, that I think is definitely the key point. Really any change you want to make is going to be it's going to be a slow, gradual change over time. People talk about, and this comes up every time that there is a Windows end of support period. Guys, there's going to be so many people that start using Linux, or when more ads get injected into Windows. Guys, this is the time. Linux, it's finally gonna be the main thing on the desktop. And I get the enthusiasm, right? But it's not like that. It's gonna be
Mm.
small increments every time. And there are absolutely people who stop using Windows because of the TPM stuff that happened, or when Windows 7 left support, or maybe 8 left support, or more ads being injected into Windows, but it's not millions of people. And that's fine, right? It's okay that you make these little dents at a time, because if you look back at, say, I don't know, the start of Debian, the people using Linux back then were a very different crowd from what we see now. Back then, you realistically were going to be a programmer, or at least had some
Mm.
sort of Unix background if you were using Linux. Then at some point Ubuntu came along, and more regular sort of computer users could actually use their system. And I've talked about this before. If I couldn't play games on my system, I would not be a Linux user. And I've had some people try to say that like Steam and Proton, it hasn't been that big of a deal for Linux. And no, it really has been. Like, I don't have two computers, and I don't want to dual boot.
Mm.
I probably should set up a capture PC at some point. I know I should do that. But regardless, the fact that you can play games on the same system that you're using Linux on, you can game on your Linux system. For a lot of people, that was the last thing that pushed them over the edge. And then all of these little things that Windows does to make it so slightly worse pushes more people to at least maybe not swap, but at least try it out and see what it's like. And
Mm.
even though it's only a couple of people at a time, it's a couple of people at a time. And over the years, that adds up. And eventually, you have what we have now, where you have this fairly healthy ecosystem. It could certainly be better, and there are certainly funding issues that exist, and
Mm.
development issues, and bug triaging issues. But I think for the most part, we're in a pretty good state.
Yeah, I think so too, actually. And it's a really interesting discussion on the year of the Linux desktop and when it's finally going to happen. I mean, it will happen in some sense, but it's not like Linux will explode and everyone will just stop using Windows.
Right.
For me, the whole thing is the year of the Linux desktop will come as soon as you have like uh, a sort of sortiment. How would I say it? Let's just put it like you have 50% Windows PCs and 50% Linux PCs in a store. At that point, I could say the Linux desktop is basically here simply because it's mainstream.
Mhm.
And I think that's like the main thing is as soon as Linux becomes some sort of mainstream platform, it's the year of the Linux desktop. And in some way, we are already at the start of it because of the Steam Deck, and like people are using Linux even though they don't necessarily even know about it.
Right.
And I'm not talking about embedded systems and all that stuff.
Or like Chrome
It's
OS or
whole.
Android. I guess you'd count those differently.
Yeah, those two are also a different thing. Like Chrome OS is almost a Linux distribution in the sense that we would talk about the Linux distribution. Android is a bit in is more of is more in a tough spot because
Mhm.
there's like so much in it that's different.
Right.
So yeah, then there is the whole argument on GNU/Linux and all the other things.
Uh,
But I agree.
did my Steam start downloading something? No, your camera just dropped in quality. I don't know whose side that's on. It's fine. I can still hear you fine. It's just
Okay.
you're now like 3 pixels.
Oh yeah, what the hell? 180p. That's fun.
It's fine. Um, yeah, no,
Okay.
I pretty much agree. I don't, I yeah. I think you summed that up pretty well. I don't think there's really anything else to add to that. Actually, one thing is with Chrome OS. Chrome OS is a very weird one, and you did say it was like almost a Linux distro because you can run Linux software on it, but that's not like the main intention, and it's changing now. Like traditionally with Chrome OS systems, they shipped with very, very minimal storage. Now you are seeing, actual SSDs going into them, and they can store local files. Previously, you were getting 32 gigabyte storage on was six. Like, there basically were phones at that point with the level of storage they had. But even though it may not be the main intention, I do think there is an argument to be made that Linux had become mainstream in a sense because of Chrome OS. In the same way that you can argue that Unix is mainstream because of Mac OS. Even though the way that most people interact with it is very different, at its core, you can still interact with it as if it is a Linux system or a Unix system in the context of Mac OS.
Yeah. I agree, essentially. So the thing about macOS in particular is it's a Unix system. Yeah, sure. At its core, quite literally. But people are just not using a Unix system, like as in the sense that some would think of it. And I guess that Linux will at some point also go into that direction, just that it is more open source in general, at not being locked down. So you add up a lot of features. A lot of people complain about some stuff that it gets bloated and all that. But at its core, you don't have to use it in the way that it's being developed. You can always strip out parts. You can always build your own experience. I think that Linux in general is just a better way how a future operating system might look like. Because you have the modularity, if you want it, but at the same time, you also have the way how the devs intended, or the big teams. And I find that pretty exciting.
I think the only thing really holding it back from that is there is outside of GNOME, you have a lot of developers designing things. And that's not to take anything away from KDE. KDE's gotten a lot better in this regard. If you go back and look at 3 and 4, very much was developers clearly designing things. But I think right now, GNOME is one of the very few UI polished experiences, and I feel kind of a similar way with Cosmic as I do with KDE. Have you seen much of what is happening on the Cosmic side?
I haven't looked into it except some screenshots, or I think the beta is coming out soon.
Alpha, I believe, is what they're calling it.
Or alpha, yeah. So I know how it's going to look like a bit, and they're doing a pretty good job. But I think that people are in general having they have too much expectation of Cosmic, because if you want, let's call it a unique design choice that spans across the entire desktop environment, then you have problems developing it, and then you are essentially into the whole GNOME policy stuff. Whereas like you want to implement it, but you cannot because like it's not in the framework itself yet, or you're not allowed to use it in that way. Yeah, let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm personally excited for it solely because it is a desktop environment that supports tiling. Like, that's my main reason for it. And I know, like, the devs want to... They built PopShell. They want to build a proper tiling desktop environment experience alongside a floating experience, because they know they have the metrics on it that most people are not using the tiling. But a lot of people do, and especially a lot of developers do like that experience. So I'm very curious to see what a desktop environment that has a strong tiling and floating system is actually capable of doing. What I'm curious about is how much they're going to go down the GNOME or the KDE side when it comes to exposing settings, because it looks a lot like GNOME. It pretty clear that that's a lot of their inspiration. This is what I was getting at before, where I do feel like a lot of the design concepts they have are kind of discount GNOME. It's an alpha, right? Like, things can improve, and early KDE and early GNOME were not great looking. And I'm sure as we see version 2, version 3, a lot of those issues will be ironed out. And that's understandable. They want to get something out there and then go from there. But I'm curious to see how much they go down this route and what they can learn from the desktops before them, because this is... because you can build something completely in a vacuum, and that's cool and all, but I think if you can take what the other environments have done and what you like about them, what you don't like about them, and then make sure you don't replicate those bad behaviors, I think it can get up to speed a lot quicker than a lot of people might expect. I know initially people were talking about Cosmic and were very wary of it, like, oh, and it's a new desktop environment. How's it going to be anywhere near as good as what we already have? But they're not starting from zero in a sense. Like, maybe they're starting from zero code, but they're not starting from zero experience with the Linux, like with the Linux desktop.
Yeah. So I think the whole thing about the Cosmic development currently is that their baseline is essentially what they had before, and all the additions that maybe GNOME has added up until now. And then, of course, you have KDE Plasma there, which also had a lot of changes. And they are probably going to integrate a lot of these things very quickly. And in the end, I think what Cosmic is going to be is you have like... you certainly see the GNOME experience in some way still, especially like margins and all that stuff and how the menus look in general. But I think you are exposed to much more settings that are tended to please everyone. That includes like variable refresh rate support, fractional scaling. Then, of course, you have maybe setting on some laptops, the mouse pad. On some laptops, you need to set it to area, or that you only can scroll at the side or something. I think like those things will be integrated into the desktop environment itself. So it's basically GNOME is the baseline. Then you have extensions from KDE Plasma and maybe their own additions, which certainly will have an influence on their own desktop PCs, or maybe the other way around, the desktops they build. Whatever is in there will be also available in Cosmic. And I think that's something that other desktop environments cannot achieve that easily, because they just don't know what hardware the user is going to have.